Today is 15th of July. Welcome to another episode of Simon Says. And I want to kind of continue our theme for the last couple of weeks, right? We are talking about 250th anniversary of United States. And last week we kind of talked about some Supreme Court cases, right? So I think we're supposed to talk about 3 cases, but we kind of like just discussed 30 minutes on the birthright case. But one of the things about the Supreme Court, and now recently I've been kind of just comparing it with the UK law and comparing it to Malaysia. And because some people are kind of like questioning the legitimacy of the Supreme Court and both the left and right. And they kind of pointed out to one of the most important cases in the history of SCOTUS, which is Marbury versus Madison, which, by the way, as a law student, as a Commonwealth law student, we also studied this case because that's the case they always say, it differentiates the American jurisprudence from the rest of the world. And in that case, to quickly sum up, the Supreme Court basically gave itself the power to review the Constitution and other law. And I was just curious because in Malaysia, we know we have Article 121, which Tun Mahathir kind of like neutered it after the 1988 crisis. But we were just discussing a while ago, right, that I think 2021, Tengku Maimun, the Chief Justice then, said that amendment made by Tun Mahathir's administration did not apply to the federal court. And I think that's why, remember when they were talking about whether they should extend Tengku Maimun, even like PMS didn't do it. Did you feel like it's because, we talk about, she's like a women Chief Justice. But we also remember, I think many months ago, we talked about some of the cases she decided they kind of like shake the establishment, right? So what do you think generally about the state of the judiciary in Malaysia right now?
I think we're still a bit experiencing the aftermath of what has happened in the 1988 judicial crisis, especially with what Tun Mahathir has essentially done in the sense that it literally restricted the powers of the Chief Justices, the court. So I felt like that part, we are still, I guess for lack of better words, this current generation is still suffering from that consequences. So in a way, later on when we are going to like talk about how the Supreme Court justices, they are basically deciding cases based on like principle rather than consequential actions. So I felt like on that note, we are still suffering because Malaysia usually, because of the common law and because of where we are and following after British Constitutional Act and things like that. So I felt like we are still very much, there is consequences to be paid. So again, it's not saying that we shouldn't be principled only and not looking at consequential effects, but now that we are like gearing more on the other pendulum where it's more consequential. So I think in that sense, I think we're still suffering from the consequences of what has happened in 1988. But having said that, I felt like Tengku Maimun is exceptional in the sense that she did mention that the federal constitution clauses on the power of judiciary should be read in the context of its original meaning. So in that sense, I think she's more like originalist.
Yeah, in fact, in 2021, I think in the Indira Gandhi case, she kind of, I'm just trying to quote what she said, because she was trying to say that the amendment made in 1988 did not apply. And this is what she said. She said, the court has taken the approach of reading down the amendment. There was thus no real need to strike down because you have 2 options. You can say the amendment was unconstitutional and you had to remove it. But she took a more novel and maybe somewhat diplomatic approach by saying, look, we don't need to say it's illegal. We just don't need to give it so much attention. So in a way, it's kind of a slap to the establishment and probably contributed to one of the reasons why there were not many supporters, because she's a kind of justice that shake the status quo. Remember with Sisters for Islam case, a few cases which kind of went out of expectation.
Yeah, I think that's where our PMX falls behind expectation, in the sense that he is supposed to be reform, like very much advocating for reformation in this land, and one of it includes the judicial reform, but he's really not living up to the expectation at all. So I felt like on that note, what is happening in Johor state election, if we're not careful, I felt like we're gonna lead towards what is happening in the UK, in the sense that, okay, I mean, people are just gonna like having that voters fatigue and bye-bye, we're not gonna come and vote. And I certainly do hope that we don't have to like go through that sort of long suffering process to having to crash correct whichever thing that has happened in the previous generation, and even what is happening in our current generation.
Yeah, I know we're not supposed to talk about Johor election, right? But this is a very quick one. It's really, and we kind of cover in this show, so that PMS try to appeal to the traditional block, like the civil service, the B40, use the Mahakaya and things like that. And but the thing is, when he did that, he couldn't get he couldn't get most of the vote from that block, which went back to Barisan Nasional. I'm talking about the Johor election, of course. Then his own base, it's like they have a different kind of need and expectation. So there is a great disconnect here that, I'm just not sure there's enough time for course correction, but that analysis will come another time, another show. Now back to the Supreme Court case, and I think our own judicial crisis and the Madison Marbury case kind of, a lot of people have said, look, the judiciary, in terms of sheer power, they are the weakest, because they can't call upon the police, they can't call upon the Secretary of State. They have limit. They have a decree, they have a court order, but if the government doesn't want to enforce it, they only have legitimacy in terms of being accepted by the public.
But what was done during that particular case, what's it called, Marbury versus Madison? I think what it presented was that the Supreme Court justices, they are created to be equal to executive branch and also the Congress. So I felt like that part, well, the then Chief Justice is somewhat genius in the sense that he's trying to like make it like equal, although initially it was pretty vague in terms of the power that justices hold.
Yeah, because the Article 3 of the Constitution kind of say, you have the Supreme Court, but it never mentioned what it can do, what it cannot do. Unlike Congress, unlike the two houses of Congress, unlike the president, so a lot of things are very vague. So for the first 10 years in the history of America, SCOTUS basically play a very little role, very little dispute went there because nobody is quite sure what is their role. So finally, there is an opportunity, and this is where the Chief Justice, was brilliant in such a way that he did it. And the thing is, his decision was accepted by everyone. So that began the whole historical saga of judicial review. And I mean, look, even remember the election between George W. Bush and Al Gore was decided by a Supreme Court decision. And Al Gore conceded based on that. I don't know today. We don't have another election that went to Supreme Court because remember Trump tried to do that with 2020. It wasn't successful. But imagine if Supreme Court affirm or overturn another presidential election, would the party accept?
I guess it's similar to any World Cup match, right?
Oh man, no, we're veering into more controversial. But at the end of the day, it always depends on the judge, and I mean even in very objective kind of like voting is supposed to be very objective. I say supposed because the American voting laws are so crazy. Like some states they allowed the ballot mail-in ballot to be counted 21 days after the polling has closed. And they don't need a name, they don't need a signature. You're talking about all the blue states. So that is the reason why Trump wanted to enact the SAFES Act. But which I think is a good time for us to talk about one of the case, which is Trump versus Slaughter, right? And now of course, when the whole Trump versus Slaughter, of course, is talking about how much executive power the president has. But it's interesting that Trump kind of made it, because remember that the birthright case, the transgender, they all came out. So then the tariff case went against him. So he wins some, he lose some. But Trump made a very interesting statement. He said, well, I didn't like that we didn't win the birthright case, but Trump versus Slaughter more than made up for it. So to him, it's okay you rule against me in birthright. This is a more important case. So I know I'm supposed to cover it. Maybe I just quickly summarize and you can give me some of your thoughts, okay? Because in that case, it's basically, so there's a subtitle called independent agencies. So you have, so for example, we have different agencies in Malaysia. You have like LHDN, you have SSM. All these are kind of like quasi-government, right? They are kind of established by acts of parliament, and then and who they report to, sometimes it's a bit vague, talking about like Securities Commission, Bursa Malaysia. They are a bit like, they're like their own entity, but they are also kind of accountable to the government. So the whole thing about this Trump versus Slaughter is, when you have this kind of agency, what is the extent of the presidential power in terms of managing them, in terms of remove? So the background was that in his first term, he actually, so they have this Federal Trade Commission. So I think they have 4 or 5 members, and they do have a quota. You need to at least 2 from one of the Republican and 1 from the Democrat. I mean, the 2-party system is so entrenched, right, in America. So in his first term, he appointed this lady called Rebecca Slaughter. Then in his second term, when he came back, he decided to remove her. And without cause, without reason. So Slaughter went to sue Trump. That's why the case is called Trump versus Slaughter, okay? So the whole issue is, can the president remove, this kind of quasi-independent agencies head? So in a 6-3 decision, the majority say the president could, and this is what Chief Justice Roberts said, the president must have the assistance of officers he can trust. If an agency exercises executive order, the president should have a right to remove and appoint. But of course, they kind of make some exceptions. So specifically, they talk about Federal Reserve. And they say Federal Reserve is not quite executive, it's quasi-judicial. So whatever that means, So maybe, I think what Roberts is trying to say is that the Federal Reserve actually come from judicial decree, actually. So, but anyway, that's arguable, because in another case, remember, Trump tried to remove Cook, who was the governor, and the Supreme Court saying no. So basically that is, but then what this case does is it really strengthens the executive. He'll be able to appoint the people that he wants. What I guess is kind of logic, right? I mean, it's like in Malaysia, if you are the prime minister, you can hire and fire anyone in PMO. You can hire and fire the chief secretary, but of course here we have subject to appointment by argons, and that's why our constitution is like, people kind of like asking what is the role of the argon, right?
Yeah.
Because remember, it's like some people say it's just ceremonial and like British, but other people say, oh no, our argon has more power than the king or queen of United Kingdom. But anyway, we're not going to get in there. But what do you think of all this thing? I mean, Trump really loves that because he has been kind of like he has been blocked everywhere he's trying to do things, right?
I thought it was kind of interesting because his second term, he's really very deliberate in terms of how he's hiring people and even putting in the right people of caliber. I mean, you talk about like Scott Bessent, he used to work for George Soros. So, but I mean, he's like not really so political in that sense. I felt like he is more like, what can you do? How efficient are you at your work that you're being hired to do? So I think on that note, I would agree that, and even I think even in Malaysia, I mean, we also have that measure as well. But I do think that decision itself, it really gives that president the full power over the executive branch. I mean, he is, after all, the head of the executive branch. So I felt like that part, it's almost like a given, of course, because there is this interpretation of the judicial, ruling and things like that. But I don't think that it is only reasonable, just like if you operate it in any organization and if you have stuff that you really, really don't like and they're
you
not
should have the right
performing.
to
Exactly.
remove them.
So I feel like it's the same thing as well. I mean, if you talk about efficiency, efficacy at work, I mean, it should be the same. I mean, if not more, all these people are actually subject to the people, in terms of their deliverables of work and things like that. So I think it is definitely a big win for Trump.
Yeah, and some try to argue that he doesn't have the power because all these positions were confirmed by the Senate. But then the thing about the Senate confirmation is, in fact, the original concept is confirm and it's not even consent. It is really to make sure that these people are not nutcase, So you're not supposed to inhibit the executive power, but then you are just there to make sure that the president is not appointing some lunatics, right?
Yeah, but you can also see the argument with the progressive as well, where they felt like, hey, this is like you are giving total control to a dictator, like to someone who does not respect the law. But in fact, I think it is the law, the confines of the law that actually cause a nation not to be lawless. So I felt like on that note, the progressives sometimes, if they really listen to what they are saying, I feel like they... I don't know why they would see it that way.
If they say too much power, then who should have this power? The Congress? The Congress make the law and they control the purse. The judiciary, surely not, because judiciary, look at the SCOTUS and the birthright case. You talk about Dinesh D'Souza analysis, right? It's like they're concerned about the principle. What is the practical effect? None of our business. So that's the SCOTUS kind of approach for the last 50 to 100 years. So, yeah, I don't think they want the responsibility. In fact, the Madison versus Marbury is exactly they don't want to make the decision, but then they want to have the legitimacy in terms of interpreting the law. So that's why it was kind of a brilliant decision because they are not responsible. Because basically in that case, the outgoing president, John Adams, can you imagine 3 days before you are supposed to leave office and you appoint a whole host of people. So they call that the midnight appointment. Then when the new president, Jefferson, came in, and I think Jefferson was like pissed off, and refused to accept the appointment. So one of the guy who was appointed went to the court and said, I want the court to validate my appointment. And the court is like, oh, surely we can't do that. But then very brilliantly, why we cannot do that is because the law you use was wrong. So by saying that you can't do that, they actually interpret the law, which gives them the power of judicial review. So that's why it's considered one of the most brilliant decisions in terms of giving legitimacy. But people are now attacking this and say, how can you give yourself power? But I guess it's like when you need the Supreme Court, then you will not attack them. When you don't agree with it, like birthright case, now, the liberal will be like, oh, yeah, we support the SCOTUS, right? But imagine every time the decision flip against them, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, oh, we need to pack the court. The court has no legitimacy. The left is just simply crazy lunatics. Lawless. But anyway, enough ranting. Okay, can we quickly go over the transgender case? Because that's another one, not so complicated in terms of the legal decision, but I want maybe you can summarize the case very quickly. Then we talk about some of the social impact.
Yeah, in this case, the Supreme Court actually ruled that the states can exclude transgender athletes from women's and girls' sports team. So it is not violating the law, violating the federal civil rights law, but then they are also saying that it's also not violating the Constitution because at least with regards to the athlete in the case before the court. So in this 29-page opinion, so Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he wrote this, that consistent with the Title 9 and Equal Protection Clause, we hold that the states may maintain women and girls sports for biological female. So in a way, it is brilliant because it interprets and gives definition to what it means to be a woman.
Kind of remember when Kentucky Brown was being confirmed, she doesn't, I mean,
Someone who feels like she's a woman.
yeah, but I mean, okay. Later on, of course, we have seen some really nutcase decision by Kentucky, but I don't think she's stupid. Okay, so why do you think? I mean, let's talk about the philosophical reasoning of the progressive. Well, what are they trying to do here? In terms of, but I mean, look at so many in terms of abortion, in terms of LGBT. Previously last year, remember there's one case. The majority was written by Gorsuch. Talking about the bakery one. So, what's the real issue here? Is it like? I mean, even in Malaysia, right? You hear people be like, you should sympathize with the LGBT, the Q people, because it's like they're trapped in the body they want. There's a lot of this kind of argument. Look, whatever you want to do privately, I'm totally fine. But I think one of the reasons is when they are not happy with just exercising their right privately, they want to impose this standard on society. And if you don't play ball with them, they want to do harm to you and even make your behavior a criminal activity. I think that's the real reason the conservatives are pushing back, because you are like weaponizing the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. I mean, in terms of weaponization, in terms of, I feel like a lot of this is actually the woke is actually a mind virus. Basically, it robs you of the right to think critically and think logically even. So it's like, in many sense, by having packed the Hollywood movies with a lot of this agenda whereby, you always have that best friend who is a trans, who is coming out of the closet, and he is not he is very, very kind. So I felt like on that part, I mean, the agenda has started way early on. But actually I like what First Lady Melania Trump, what she wrote with regards to this whole case. She mentioned that, as many of you know, I fully support the LGBTQIA plus community, but we must also ensure that our female athletes are protected and respected. So, and she actually wrote this in her book as well. And so what it is saying is that America, we can support the rights of all this community, the transgender LGBTQ community, and also protect the opportunities for female athletes. So I feel like in a land that advocates so much of freedom, you're not free entirely to just do anything and everything by forcing down your wrong ideology in people's throat. So I felt like that part is something that makes America so unique, in the sense that there is freedom to do many, many things, but it's not also profitable to do that. I mean, the community may not like that you are always cursing or making things just unpleasant for a lot of people. So there are certain restrictions whereby if you go to the cinema, you can't, like, in that crowded places when there is no fire, you shout fire. Then, I mean, like, these sort of things are actually something that is not beneficial to the society. So I feel like what it does in this case specifically on the transgender not being able to compete in any women's sports, and you also see the apex of what has happened in the Paris Olympics as well, where you see so many transgender athletes, especially like boxer, who is like just playing, a trans boxer just playing in women's sports. So it's like, it's insanity because of the strength that a man carries versus what women carry. So it's like, even J.K. Rowling was just saying, I mean, how much insanity do you want to force down the people's throat until do you want to see like life-altering injuries on female athletes? So I felt like that protection should be given to women, because women is generally weaker in the sense that they are not as strong as men. So they need protection in that sense. So I mean, imagine if you're having girls play, your own girl is playing in the sports where it's just dominated by men. So I don't think any parents would be very, very comfortable doing that.
Absolutely. And the whole transgender kind of argument kind of alienated even the gays and lesbian, like so many gays and lesbian are against the transgender. And do you think like it is because the whole thing Now, of course, you mentioned about woke being like a virus that kind of infect your mind. But do you think that the whole thing has also been hijacked by the Marxists? Because that's how you control society. That's how you control people. And I mean, I don't have the exact data, but you look at so many shooting cases now. Like many of them are basically people who are in the process of transitioning. Because when you transition from one gender to another gender, you basically have to pump like tons of chemical into yourself. So that kind of wreck your brain, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's like you're normal, but you are being sold the lie that you are not normal, and hence you need to have all this chemical injection to cause you to be normalized. And in fact, you're denormalized.
I mean, if you want to be a freak, by all means, go and be a freak. But you don't use the public money. You don't demand the insurance pay you. You don't demand the education cater to you. You don't demand that Hollywood makes movie. I mean, now they are starting to wake up to the fact that woke will make you broke. So, but I don't know. I mean, it's just like, I mean, the tech bro, because of second term Trump, they felt a bit liberated. Because I think, unfortunately, most of the CEO are just a bunch of useless guys. Okay, and they're like, oh, we were forced by Biden. Zuckerberg, they all say, all the censorship and Google and things like that. And now they come out and start to be a little bit more brave, because Trump basically say, enough with this kind of woke crap. But, you look at all these organizations, look at Hollywood, look at the tech, and now with AI, you really have a lot of power to influence. And that is the reason people wanted to have some kind of legal framework, because we're seeing how the big tech censor the conservative. We don't want the same to be repeated in the AI world, which is going to happen.
Exactly. But again, coming back to this, I feel like we are treading, yes, I mean, although the Supreme Court justices, they were ruling it on principle basis with regards to the transgender competition in women's sports, there is also somewhat like a bit of analysis. I mean, if you think about it, like subtly, there is also that consequential effect in the sense that you begin to see people like a bit mellow down in terms of, hey, like we need to be super vocal about transgender right and things like that. I mean,
you're talking about the court itself, or I think the court is very careful not to even give a hint, right?
Correct. But
actually, I never did realize that is their position.
Exactly. So it's kind of brilliant in the sense that
but you can see people like Clarence Thomas, and they are trying to come to that conclusion without talking about the consequence.
Exactly. But in a way, it is a pushback, just like how overturning of Roe v. Wade, it is a pushback against what has been forced down the people's throat. So I guess like on that note, I don't think the conservative they are. I guess conservative, they're also trying to find what's the acceptable conservative values where people could actually accept. I mean, because you can't be like forcing down legislating morality on people when people don't really desire it. I mean, you could also have like a severe effect on the society itself. Like, let's say you are forcing people to have social media ban and things like that, or
I mean, they already experienced it with
smoking.
prohibition.
Correct. So with all this thing, it is something that I guess I like what Dinesh D'Souza he mentioned. People should be more MAGA in their approach, in the sense that even with how they are like trying to promote certain values. So I feel that part is something that is acceptable, and that could be some starting point even for Malaysia as well. Like, how are we gonna come to that middle ground, to not compromising, but also that sort of middle ground where people can actually accept, okay, I want this, I want that in the society, but I don't want certain things in the society. So that part, I think, is something that is kind of good.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of say we don't really want to talk about the recent state election, but I think we can kind of wrap up because your last point kind of pivot us there, in terms of what do we want in a nation, right? And I was just reading one analysis about PMS. I mentioned earlier on he was focusing. I think a few times. I mean, we maybe 2-3 years ago, Bridget Welsh wrote an article, right? The more he pandered to Malay, the more they reject him. that remains true. So the more he pandered to B40, civil servants, the traditional establishment, remember with the citizens' rights amendment and things like that. So a lot of things he's just kind of like go with the status quo, go to what the royalty wants, So it's not helping him at all. But at the same time, you are kind of like brought in as a reformer. At the very least, you should. You should try to fulfill some of your promises, and that's one of the things I feel like. I feel like the people and maybe even the politician in Malaysia can learn from America, because Trump comes in, he has a lot of restriction also. I mean, even his so-called Republican Senate, there's always 3 or 4 or 5 crazy senators who will not want to do what he wants to do. So he has to kind of leverage, and that's why recently, the sudden death of Senator Lindsey Graham. I was just kind of surprised by all the tribute, that, love him or hate him, agree with him or disagree with him. Everyone said the same thing, that this guy gets things done. And in fact, can you imagine one of the first meeting he had after Trump won, he met with Stephen Miller and James Blake. These are like the 2 like most hardline, close border kind of person, which you don't think like, what has Lindsey Graham got to do with this hardcore guy, right? And Stephen Miller was saying the first thing Senator Graham asked was, so how much do you need for your border protection, and how soon do you need it? And they gave him a figure and deadline, and he said he'll get it done. And he helped them to pass, the big beautiful budget. Lindsey Graham one of the key players in that. So yeah, I kind of have a newfound respect for him. All this background story. You always thought he's like a stooges for Ukraine and neocon, that kind of thing. But he gets things done. So I guess in the same for Malaysia, we need people who wants to get things done, and not just like remember the good old days. The good old days wasn't that great even, right? I'm talking about Malaysia. You say Malaysia had double-digit GDP growth in the 80s, but Mahathir also destroyed the judiciary. Mahathir also created economic crisis and things like that. So, I don't know. Do you miss the good old days?
No.
But anyway, we kind of come to that, and so while the Negeri Sembilan election is coming out, and maybe after that, because I just felt like, I know initially we say maybe we want to do the Johor election, but I just felt that the emotion is not right. Everyone, there's just so much negativity out there, or we always say there's a lot of hope defer. This is like 8 or 9 years after the federal government has changed, and people felt like it seems that we are going round the circle and not progressing at all.
Who knows? Our Prime Minister might just woke up from slumber.
Mm-hmm. But I kind of remember, I always think about, the first political tsunami, 308, right, 2008, and it was right very soon after Badawi had a landslide. You remember when he had a landslide and all the opposition was in tatters, and then that happened. So, I don't know, we should give a bit of faith to our voters. Maybe they can change. We never know. But that's another episode for another day. So I think we kind of completed today's session. We'll see whether there are more interesting things to do for the American 250th birthday. Otherwise, we may pivot back to local coverage.
Sure.
Until next time, bye-bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.